We are 9 weeks in. It's November. There is no more critical time for your fantasy football season than now. This is Fourth and Frames. Drew Scott, Nate Markham. Guys, I say plural because, man, Rhett's not here with us, Drew.
I know. It's a shame, man.
But Chris Battistel, as he would say, let's get it popping.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.
That's what I hate about sometimes about a cold open is that I want to get right to talking to you because it's about every 7 days that you, Drew Scott, I, Nate Markham, get to sit down and chat about some fantasy football. We look at some smashes, some passes, some stashes, and just talk some shit. And I do that, and then I realize I'm like, oh, yeah, play the opening music. And then I say, guys, because Red's always here in spirit, right?
I know. It doesn't feel right without him here, man. I don't get me wrong. I love the quality time you and I are going to get tonight, but, Rhett will be missed.
He will. And that's the last time we'll talk about Rhett because we don't want him to think that he's, that missed, of course. Let's not get.
Got to keep his ego in check, yeah.
Of course. How have things been, brother? How you looking on the season? It is, 9 weeks in. Obviously, you have one of multiple different options. You can be 0-9. You're never going to be 0-9. You can be 1-8. Oh, you can be 9-0. If you're not first, you're last. I felt like I was getting into a Bobby, a tangent.
Yeah. Yeah.
How is the season as a whole?
As a whole, things are going well. I'm in contention in all my dynasty leagues, and that was flipping the switch after being in rebuild, like doing a quick rebuild in all of them last year. So it's nice to see that come to fruition. I get to care about the fantasy playoffs in those leagues this year. Redraft is a little bit more of a different story, a little bit more of a mixed bag. I mean, you can go online and see how horrible my Scott Fishbowl team is right now. Our listener league, my team's kind of, it's not completely in the gutter, but it's not doing great. Thankfully, you're making us look good, at least in that league. And then in my home league, I've got one. It's one of those teams where I've got one of the highest points scored on the season, but my record is terrible and there's no median scoring. And so I already know what I will be trying to pitch to my home league this offseason. And so, it's been a little bit of a mixed bag, but overall it's good. It's just going by too quick, man. It's unreal that we're here to talk week 10 tonight. Like that just doesn't even feel real. So it's just sad that we're already this close to the fantasy playoffs.
It really is. I mean, legitimately, there's in most leagues, you're probably talking 4 weeks worth of games to make a dent and make that decision, or 5 weeks to get in. Play spoiler, Colby Conway likes to come in and not play spoiler and not spoil the show. In fact, he actually enhances it probably better than we do. But I know he's had, success across the board from spin to King's Fantasy. Oh, man, King's Classic. I don't even want to talk about. We'll skip that. But Ishmael has a long question.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the $5 super chat, Ishmael. Appreciate you, man.
Ishmael, you can have the longest question known to man. I'll spend the next 45 minutes going over this with you, unless someone
let's
$10.
Let's do it.
He says, "Help me. This is what I have: Patrick Mahomes, moving up; Justin Herbert, Tyreek, Drake London, DeAndre Hopkins, then at James Conner, Chase Brown. Skipped over. My bad. Lost it there. I'm guessing that's Javonte Williams, still in running backs, Jordan Mason, Isaac Garendo, Sam Laporta, and Jake Ferguson. Start and sit, drop pick from the waiver. So looking at his team right now, let's go position by position. So right now, could he upgrade at quarterback, or do you think that Mahomes showing the last couple weeks now is positive is there progression, if you will?
Yeah. I think that with the addition of DeAndre Hopkins, I think Mahomes is I would be more comfortable playing him on a week-to-week basis. This week the matchup against Denver's tough, but then after that you got Buffalo, Carolina, Vegas, a pretty good stretch. The fantasy playoffs are a little tough for Mahomes because he has matchups against Cleveland and Pittsburgh, but that is Houston is sandwiched in between there, and they're pretty good. Like they're give up fantasy points to the quarterback position, and that should be a high scoring game. So I think you can feel good about Mahomes. I don't know if it's a super flex league, so I don't know if this is a situation where he has to start Mahomes and Herbert. And then I don't know if this is start 3 receivers or if it's just start 2 running backs, 2 receivers, and a flex. I'm going to go with that just because it's the most common lineup structure typically across the board. Ishmael, I mean, if you want to let us know if it's not that, but if you're looking at one quarterback, I'm comfortable with Mahomes. 2 running backs, you've got a ton of good options between Connor and Chase Brown, Javonte.
The second part of the question says mention some names on the waiver, but then it goes into detail and it says it's a 12-team PPR. Most of the teams are that in that bundle, that 4-5, 5-4, 3-6. Only 2 players at 6 and 3.
Yeah.
So there's each win can jump 4 or
Yeah.
5. So in a full point PPR, looking at what he has on the from his lineup, you give me a yes or no if you think these players on his waivers will help an immediate, if it's a priority to help his team. Quentin Johnson, knowing that he has Tyreek, Drake London, DeAndre Hopkins.
I wouldn't play Quentin Johnson over any of those guys.
Would you play Mike Williams, Jalen McMillan, or Jamison Williams over any of those, or over any of the third running back if it is a 3 wide receiver and 1 flex? Meaning, would you start Jamison or the aforementioned wide receivers over Javonte Williams?
I think there could be a week to week, so just depending on the matchup Javonte have versus the receivers. I do think there could be a world where I would play Quentin Johnston, or even McMillan if he gets healthy. McMillan's tough because I think he's a little banged up right now, but I think Quentin Johnston would be the one that I would at least pick up to see if there's still something, if there's something there, if the trend continues. But right now, I think most of the guys that he has out there are the guys I'm going to be plugging in every week. Like I'm playing Mahomes, I'm playing Tyreek, London Hopkins every week. I'm playing Connor and Chase Brown every week. And then it's just kind of a question of Javonte or, insert receiver here off the waiver. So I'll throw these names up on the screen. I mean, I know you were a JMO guy at the beginning of the year. I mean, do you think that I think for me, tell me if you disagree with this. I think for me, the guy to drop on his team would be Garindo with the CMC news and with Jordan Mason also apparently getting healthy. I think if you want to drop somebody, I think Garindo's the guy you drop because I think Laporta and Ferguson are both I think that I would hold on to both of those guys. I wouldn't be comfortable sending either one of them to the waiver. So I think Garindo's the guy to drop. Would you drop him for Quentin Johnston or Mike Williams now that he's been traded? Jalen McMillan, J-Mo?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, yes, but I would drop Garindo for both J-Mo and Quentin Johnson in that order for me. The only thing about Jameson Williams that I hate is his playoff schedule. As you get into that point when, if he helps you get a couple victories, because that's what he'll do right now. Over the next couple weeks, Jameson Williams can very easily help propel you to the playoffs because he's got a matchup at Houston, Jacksonville, at Indy, and then unfortunately when the playoffs start, it's the Bears, the Packers, the Bills, but then the Bears again. So he's got bookend, Bears, potentially in the semifinals. And even in the last week of the playoffs or the first week, depending upon just how long some playoffs do 2-week championships, how the different leagues
right.
are. But
yeah,
it's so, I think we answer the question in this. We're both comfortable with you dropping Isaac Garindo. And I think we're both comfortable with you choosing between Quentin Johnson and Jamison. If that's what I'm gathering, did I speak for you properly?
Yes, you did. And the intriguing thing with Quentin Johnston is he has a tough matchup against Tennessee this week, but then after that he has Cincinnati, Baltimore, Atlanta. So 3+ matchups, and then a tough matchup week 14 against Kansas City. But then the first week of the fantasy playoffs, he has Tampa, which is a great matchup. But then week 16, a tough matchup against Denver, and then New England's kind of middle of the pack in the fantasy championship. But so, I mean, once you get past the tough matchup against Tennessee this week, it's pretty much all good or neutral matchups for Quentin Johnston other than 2 weeks the rest of the way. So he's got a better schedule. You know, we'll see if the 70% snap rate continues for QJ, you know, and then the 5 targets helps, but you're probably going to need him to be in the end zone for you to be happy with his fantasy production. But I think he's at least worth picking up. I don't know if I'd play him this week, but I think he's worth picking up to see if he's a startable player over, you know, the stretch from weeks 11 to 13, whenever the matchups are so strong. I think you could very well play him. And so he said you've got 1 quarterback, 2 receiver, 2 running back, 1 flex. Okay.
Right. Makes it's just more of a depth piece at this stage, or a bye week replacement, which is really nice. And Scampers, of course, jumped in and added a very fantasy savvy move. Drop Javonte as a waiver wire landmine.
Yeah, make him somebody else's problem.
Exactly, because he probably will be a casualty that we may get to in a little bit as well. But you know, you were saying, talking about the flexibility. I didn't go as far as looking at any of the bye week situations right now. I figured that
the Chargers are already past their buys, so that you don't have to worry about QJ having to miss a game for that. The Lions are also past their buy as well.
There you go.
I'm intrigued with McMillan too, honestly, as he does get healthy. Nolan Godwin's going to miss the rest of the year. Mike Evans will be back in a couple weeks. And Cade Otton looks good, but I could see him carving out a role down the stretch. But knowing you only have to start 2 running backs, 2 receivers every week, like I know that Connor, Chase Brown, they're plugged in every week. I know Tyreek and London, they're plugged in every week. Hopkins is your flex. So I think you drop Garindo for your favorite of those receivers between, you know, we've made the case for QJ, JMO, and then somewhat McMillan as well. But I think
I'd agree with McMillan. I think that, as you know, that first week there was the situation of the injury a little bit too, that went into just how much of a slot role he was going to occupy. And as that goes forward, there's a good chance that he takes a heavier percentage of the slot snaps. And in that specific offense, in that role, he could really, really, you know, project what we've seen it every week. Whoever's been in the slot has been above average as a replacement. So I'm good with that.
All right. So Ishmael, again, shout out to you, man. Appreciate the $5 super chat. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah. You know, we wish every week was tight end appreciation week, because that week made it easy. You could start any tight end in the NFL and you were
start all the tight ends,
16 points. But unfortunately, that's not the case. I mean, and Colby says, you know, who to start. We never would have thought at the spot where it's Trey McBride or TJ Hawkinson. You know, McBride's kind of the easy, but man, the matchup against the Jets versus Hawkinson against the Jags. Hawkinson didn't look he got banged up a little bit, and he wasn't necessarily as heavily involved. And I think it was probably caution, utilization, both. Going forward, I like Hawkinson quite a bit, but in this matchup, what are you looking at, Drew? Are you gonna still ride with McBride? Ooh, I didn't play in that, but
that was nice. That was nice.
I know, that was really good.
I would still go with McBride. I think with the work he's getting, the fact that he has 0 touchdowns, like that's gotta change eventually. It's gotta break. I've still got Trey McBride as a top 3 tight end this week. Just with the usage, I think that something has to start breaking his way eventually. And so the matchup is definitely gross, but and I'm with you. I think I will like Hawkinson more as the year goes on. But only his second week back, and with McBride, all the underlying metrics still looking good. I think I would continue to roll with McBride personally.
I would too. And if you want to know any of the additional rankings that we have, you can always go over to fantasyandframes.com, find all of our rankings over there, read all the articles, individual takes, notes, etc. It's everywhere.
Which Colby also contributes to, by the way.
Which Colby does, exactly.
Shout out to you.
And we appreciate you, Colby. And we appreciate with our the chat to ride with McBride and sticky with Gesicki while T is out, no doubt.
Oh my gosh, this guy is a poet and didn't even know it.
Wow.
Well, he probably does know it. It sounds like he's a pro.
Know. But... oh, absolutely. He's I don't have anything, but right. Scampers with the bars. No shit. Thanks a lot, Scampers. My
Absolutely,
job
yeah.
is to have good segues and keep this train rolling. And then all of a sudden you throw out a sick beat or fucking rap. And now I got to try to pivot to news and notes of what's going on into week 10. And, you know, I won't say it's been as chaotic as it's been over the last couple weeks, but there's still been some news. Trade deadline obviously brought some changes. There's some bye weeks coming. The Browns, the Packers, the Raiders, the Seahawks. Not a plethora of missing pieces from viable options, but there's enough out there.
Yeah.
Biggest news I think of the week is that Dak, who at the time when he left the game, I was like, oh, no big deal. He lacerated his finger, had an open cut. It'll be good. And then he get potential on the IR, and I missed the spot where they said it was a hamstring. Like I only saw IR, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" I was like, "He cut his finger, and he's gonna go on the IR." I was like, "Man, times are tough in Dallas." But yeah, Dak, potentially going to go on the IR, still undecided. An AC for CD, which I think is another good one. Sounds very similar to ACDC, but instead AC joint injury for CD Lamb. Those two pieces missing. Dallas offense. What pieces do you want, if any, with Cooper Rush at the helm? And I know what you're going to say. Get Trey Lance out there. I'll say it for you, and I'll answer for everybody else. No. So continue on.
We know what Cooper Rush is, man. Come on, let me have my Trey Lance, my Trey Lance fun. Finally, like we're finally here. We need to let Trey Lance have some fun. I want nothing to do with Dallas's offense if there's no CD and there's no Dak. CD was going to be the only person I would be comfortable playing with Cooper Rush at quarterback. And now you take him out of the picture. Like, no, thank you. The run game's already inefficient enough. I want nothing to do it with Cooper Rush at quarterback. And the offense becoming so incredibly predictable. I want nothing to do with any of the other pass catchers. None of them are, in my mind, in my humble opinion, none of them are just talented enough to overcome what they're going to have to deal with with Cooper Rush. And so no, I'm staying away from Dallas completely at this point.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to say, oh, well, Jalen Tolbert would have just a handful of targets leaning his way, but what kind of targets are going to be? It's against the Eagles,
right? And
their pass rush has been so good as of late. I think that's going to be it's going to be a mess. And if I'm the Eagles myself, I know division rival games against the Cowboys are always difficult, but I put my foot on their throat and I absolutely don't look back. And Scampers is right. He's still starting Rico Dowdle, and I understand that.
Yeah,
I would definitely say that he was one that I was considering putting in our fade segment or pass segment. Smash, pass. Yeah. Pass.
Yes.
Good Lord. There's so many different start and sit, plays and fade, smash and pass. But I was considering that for sure. And so, and any defense is facing them. There you go. There's your Eagles' first call.
Yep. Start the Eagles defense. And Albert, what's up, man? Appreciate you. And I don't know if he's even still here, but Chris, I don't know if we threw you up here, but we love you.
I didn't.
That's right. He probably already he logged in, said something in the chat, and he closed that shit right out. So it's all good.
Exactly. It's on auto, like swipe where they have the finger. It just goes in, logs in, says hello. Scampers is correct. Dowdle with the receiving work. There you go. They're going to be behind. Yep. He should get.
They're going to be trailing plenty. That's for sure.
There's just, I would say the touchdown upside might take a little bit of a hit. Person who took a hit, might be out for a few weeks or a few games potentially, is Keon Coleman. I don't know exactly. I mean, there's a lot of injuries. Between Amari Cooper and Keon Coleman, up, down, Dalton Kincaid, Khalil Shakir.
I know, man.
That offense is just. I didn't. Really
Josh Allen gets it done every week.
I know he does, and that's what I hate.
Every week.
It wouldn't shock me who it's going to be. I mean, we saw Ray Davis come in, and he's going to get some additional work potentially if there's a lot of able bodies no longer able. So something to pay attention to. But another thing to pay attention to, watch about Trevor Lawrence. He's limited in practice. Not that we're starting T-Law everywhere, but obviously it does have an effect.
It makes a difference for the pass catchers.
Yeah, it really does. Not pass catchers, but past his prime, and we can now pass on his name. Zach Moss, finally out of the system, placed on the IR. Hip hip hooray! I'm not hip hip hooray for the injury, but now you would think, hey, clear path for Chase Brown. Nah, damn it. Khalil Herbert comes in. Does Khalil Herbert play the Zach Moss fill in 35% snap role? Does he this week? Let's go this week. And I think you know what? Let's not go this week because I don't want that to ruin any of the parade that we may talk about with Chase Brown potentially. But what do you think his involvement will be immediate or now and long term for the rest of the season for Khalil Herbert?
I think Khalil Herbert is a better running back than Zach Moss. So while Chase Brown still might get the majority of the snaps, I think that Khalil Herbert will end up being a bigger factor in the offense than Zach Moss was once he gets acclimated. And it is a little bit easier for running backs compared to some other positions to come to a new team midseason and kind of just get acclimated and learn the playbook and things like that. And I might be the wrong person to ask about this because I'm a Khalil Herbert guy. I think that he's been one of the most underrated running backs in the league for the last couple of years. And just for whatever reason, didn't get the opportunity in Chicago. Whenever he was finally getting the opportunity, he got hurt, which sucked because he was looking great. And then the injury happened last year. So I'm a Khalil Herbert believer, but I'm not to the point where I think he's going to come in and overtake Chase Brown completely or anything like that. But I do think he will be more of a factor in the coming weeks than Zach Moss was. I think he's an upgrade as just in terms of a player. So I don't necessarily think it's good news for Chase Brown either. I thought I saw somebody saying that like Chase Brown to the moon once the news happened, and I didn't really understand that at all. I think that this is I think we'll see more of what we were seeing at the beginning of the year where Zach Moss was having a pretty even split of the carries. I think Herbert will get a decent amount of the work in the goal line once he gets acclimated. So, I stashed Khalil Herbert in a couple spots just because they gave him the opportunity to seek a trade, and I'm not completely upset with the landing spot at all.
No, you can't. I mean, any given specific scenario, obviously, if Chase Brown ever were to suffer an injury, being part of a Bengals offense, the playoff schedule and schedule going forward isn't exactly glowing for the Browns, but still opportunity, and that can go into again, some of the pieces we'll talk about when we're talking about stashing some players later, making a run, being prepared, getting ready for said playoffs. The Steelers were kind of getting in a quote unquote playoff mode by acquiring Mike Williams, jumps over from the Jets, who I don't dislike the move for the Steelers. Obviously, it gives them another, a big bodied receiver to go up, complement George Pickens. They got some size on the outside. Do you think that Mike Williams' value is worthy of a week in, week out flex? Is this somebody that you're actively pursuing, or is it kind of it's Mike Williams? We've seen it.
I think it makes things a little bit better for Russ if you're in a super flex league or a really deep league and you need to stream Russ from time to time. I think it makes him a more viable streamer because Russ has a really great deep ball, and one thing Mike Williams can do is go and get it. And so it would need to be a pretty deep league or start through receivers and multiple flexes for me to want to start Mike Williams. He's still going to be a deep flex play for me. It doesn't do a whole lot for his value. It's better than where his value is at with the Jets once they traded for Adams. But so it is an improvement, but not to the point to where I'm going to feel comfortable plugging him in as a weekly flex play.
Yeah, no. One thing I don't know, and I mean it kind of intrigues me, is I wonder how his run blocking is. I know that's such a weird thing to think about, but given this offense, if he's a good run blocker, maybe especially in that type of scheme, they definitely look at that. And then last but not least, we talked about it earlier, Jameson Williams is reinstated from the suspension. What an injury. So he's going to jump right back into a similar role that he's already had, which is kind of I'd say boom or bust, but we saw that. It was definitely booming to start off, and then it was. He had some hits and some misses, and honestly, sometimes that's the name of the game. Sometimes it's good to hit big. Sometimes if you miss, the gamble was worth it, and that's very similar to what you get if you go over to Underdog. Underdog, formerly known as Underdog Fantasy, is offering free money if you use the promo code FRAMES. You'll get a 100% matchup on your deposit up to $1,000. Don't miss out on all the fun and the action over at Underdog today. Fantasy in Frames, sponsored by Underdog. What in the world are we doing? How crazy is that we get promo code frames? It's
pretty cool, man.
I love it. And the reason I'm so excited is because as of yesterday, I believe, and I haven't checked final, but Missouri, I believe, passed Proposition 2 or Amendment 2 where sports gambling will be legal. I can use Underdog here. I can use the promo code frames and I can get free match up to $1,000 or $100, $1,000 or whatever it is. 100% matchup up to $1,000. All right, Drew, we're going to talk about some smash plays, some pass plays, and some stash plays where we take a look at some players in week 10, where we're going to look at some quarterbacks maybe outside the top 12, outside the top 20 wide receivers, the top 15 running backs, the top 8 tight ends, some of the guys that, maybe on your bench, maybe in the waivers, depending upon the league, who knows? But who are you starting on? Let's get these guys a victory. Who's someone that's out there that you're thinking is absolutely going to smash this week?
Yeah, before we do that, I will just say, Ishmael, I agree with this. I do think it's Herbert over Geno. Assuming that your league doesn't play week 18, if you just leap from week 10 to week 17, the Chargers quarterback has the 8th easiest strength of schedule during that time period. Only really 2 tough matchups, one against Kansas City, which could still be high scoring, and then one against Denver. And then Seattle, compared to that, they have the 6th toughest strength of schedule rest of the season for fantasy quarterbacks. So yeah, Herbert, no knock on Geno, he's a great quarterback, but Herbert also a great quarterback and much easier schedule rest away. So yeah, I would rather roster Herbert. So and Robert, what's up,
Robert
baby?
Thomas.
Robert Thomas, the only important Robert Thomas.
And I think
even Scampers congratulating you. It's a big deal, man. It's no feeling like getting to wake up on a Sunday morning and throw together a couple nonsense parlays. Are going to have no business hitting, but there's always the hope, though. And there's just
that the hope is invaluable, except for the money I lose to build the hope.
There is some value in that.
That money is valuably spent because I get enjoyment watching one of my 8 bets actually hit and the other 7 losing. What's not a losing proposition in week 10 at the smash position for you?
So right now, Fantasy Pros Week 10 expert consensus rankings has Brian Robinson Jr. as the running back 27. And so we target running backs outside of the top 15 in the ECR. He's pretty comfortably outside the top 15. I have to assume that part of that is probably because some rankers just don't know where to put him, or they might not be ranking him yet because they're unsure if he'll play since he missed out last week. But he got a limited practice in today, which is a good sign. So I'm going to operate under the assumption that he plays this week. And even before the injury that made him miss last week's game, there's been a few weeks that hadn't been that great of a stretch for B-Rob. But it hasn't been awful either. I mean, he's still the running back 20 in fantasy points per game, and he's got a solid matchup this week. After starting the season pretty strong against the run, the Steelers have been the 4th best matchup for fantasy running backs over the last 6 weeks based on schedule adjusted fantasy points given up to the position. And so I think that just brings up a whole other point, that it's important to look at data now that we're getting a little bit deeper in the season. Look at the last 6 weeks, 7 weeks of time, instead of looking at a whole season sample, and see where the trends are changing. Because if you go on most of the fantasy apps, Pittsburgh, whenever you have a running back going up against Pittsburgh, it's looked at as a bad matchup, or they're in the red, or whatever the case may be. But over the last 6 weeks, that has not been the case. They've been all systems go, all green for running backs playing the Steelers. And so if he's healthy this week and he's back to getting the 15 to 20 rushing attempts and the couple looks in the passing game that he's been getting, I think he should easily outperform that running back 27 ranking. And with how good Washington's offenses look, there's always the upside that he sees a few goal line carries as well. So Brian Robinson Jr., if he's healthy, if he plays this week, he's a smash play for me.
Yeah, I like that. And I like the addition. The Commanders have made a focus to improve their defense as a whole, bringing in Marshawn Lattimore. And you think that if the defense improves and they get into more positive game scripts, not that they haven't already been in enough positive game scripts as they are, but even more so, it just sure seems like a good opportunity for Brian Robinson Jr. So I'm right there with you. I looked at I feel like I'm not cheating, but when I picked this player, He was at 21. Yes, I know, Nate, low-hanging fruit, one out. But I just want to emphasize that I have consistently been hesitant to jump both feet in to the Josh Downs water or the pool. And I think I'm there, especially now knowing that you and I love child Anthony Richardson's not going to be a thing right now. But if we do know one thing is that Josh Downs, I mean, 2 straight games, he's had 9 targets, at least 9 in 5 of the last 6 games. At that point, I can't just look at each one and go, all right, that was a fluke. But the matchup against Buffalo, Buffalo's left the 6th most yards to slot receivers. We see Downs play enough in the slot. We see him dominate and at all levels this point, especially against a defense that, while seemingly difficult, Buffalo hasn't exactly been just dynamite against pass catchers as a whole. And I think that's where the Colts are going to have to try to exploit him, because while I think Jonathan Taylor can establish something, if I'm Buffalo, that would be my focus, is to make sure that Jonathan Taylor is not the person that beats us. And so as the wide receiver 21, he's now the wide receiver 20. In just one day's time, he's moved up a spot. I don't know if he'll move up much higher than that, but there's plenty of other guys in that same general realm that, you're looking at a person like Marvin Harrison Jr. against the Jets. A couple spots down, I have him from Josh Downs, and I get the feeling that many people are going to look at those 2 players in their lineup and easily just want to hit Marvin Harrison Jr. And I'm here to tell you that, look at the matchup, look at the situation, and Josh Downs, I think, is the better play.
Yeah. Josh Downs is just such an incredible receiver, man. And it's been a lot of times we see guys that are great NFL receivers, but it doesn't translate to fantasy production. But that has not been the case at all with Josh Downs. So yeah, I'm continuing to fire him up. I know Flacco didn't look the best last week, but I do think that even though I don't agree with putting Flacco in, I also don't believe that last week will be the norm of what we see out of Flacco either. So yeah, I'm with you. I'm firing Downs up with confidence. And Ishmael, I got to tell you, man, I get it. Ferguson over Laporta moving forward. All the draft capital, you don't want to be, one of those folks stuck in the sunk cost fallacy and things like that. But things got a lot more complicated here recently, man. Now that there's no Dak Prescott, there's questions about the quality of targets that Jake Ferguson's going to get. I really think you just got to look at this on a week-by-week basis. I've got Laporta a slightly higher this week, even despite the fact that they have a tough matchup, because the Dallas Cowboys, they also have to play Philadelphia, who's tough against tight ends. So you've got Jake Ferguson in a tough matchup with Cooper Rush at quarterback, or you've got Sam Laporta in a tough matchup with Jared Goff at quarterback. And it makes things tough for Laporta too, because the one good game he did have was while Jameson Williams was out. Now Jameson Williams is back. So it's not going to feel good playing either of these guys. But whenever you look at their schedule the rest of the way, I think the Cowboys tight end room has the 7th toughest strength of schedule rest of season, and then the Detroit Lions has the 6th easiest strength of schedule for tight ends the rest of the way. So once Laporta gets through this game against Houston, his schedule rest of season is pretty much nothing but either neutral or good matchups for fantasy tight ends. So I would just play that one week by week. I wouldn't plug Ferguson in, and just set it and forget it. I might have been with you before Dak got hurt, but with Dak's injury, it makes things a little bit more complicated.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I think that it sucks that you have to make that decision by having 2 good tight ends each week, because it's going to happen. One week you're going to make the wrong move. It's going to be a touchdown dependent situation, and you're going to beat yourself up over it. Or, if you ask others and you get motivated one way or the other, blame them, unless it's us. And then if that's the case, it was a fluke, whatever happened. But trust the process, I think, is what they say. And I think the process will lead you to still at Laporta's the better option week in and week out. Who's a better option than some of the top players for you this week, Drew?
Yeah, speaking of tight end, and look, if he's somehow out there on your waiver wire, which has been happening in some leagues, apparently, from what I've been seeing. I know it's been a rough year for those of us like myself that invested in Mark Andrews all over the place during draft season this year. But I think we get an Andrew Spike game tomorrow night against Cincinnati. Likely, they already said Isaiah Likely's not going to play this week, which should only help pump up Mark Andrews' route percentages and his involvement for the week. And it's coming at the perfect time. The Bengals defense, they're a good matchup for wide receivers too, but they're an even better matchup for tight ends. Cincinnati's been the third easiest matchup for fantasy tight ends over the last 6 weeks. And even though the fantasy production hasn't necessarily been there consistently, Andrews has still been playing well. He's still top 8 among tight ends in both yards per route run and first down per route run against man coverage. He's still beating his man on a consistent basis. But the receiving room is a little bit more crowded. Isaiah Likely was also a part of that. He was starting to, to eat into some of those passing downs, which, rightfully so. Likely has looked good. Like, he should be a part of the offense, but we know, at least for this week, that is not going to be the case. So with no Likely, a good matchup against the Bengals, Andrews is a smash play for me this week, and I think that he should outperform his tight end 10 ranking according to Fantasy Pros ECR. I've got him ahead of Laporta and Ferguson and guys like that. I've got him closer to my top 6 than the top 10. So I think I think we're getting a Mark Andrews week this week.
Nice. Before I get to my second smash play, Moots Monk has a question pertaining to his 10-team half-point PPR. Here's the team. At quarterback, he's got Kyler. Running backs, he's got Derrick Henry, Breece Hall, Kyron Williams, DeAndre Swift. Wide receivers, Drake London, DK, Brian Thomas Jr., Devonta Smith, DeAndre Hopkins, Kelsey Njoku. Does he trade Kyler, Swift, and Devonta Smith for Josh Allen and Josh Jacobs? Obviously, I think Allen is a pretty significant upgrade over Kyler. You're probably not starting DeAndre Swift in any scenario going forward with confidence. Can I make the case that Swift can be have better, as good, if really close numbers to any of the other running backs? Sure. DeAndre Swift's been fantastic. No more Khalil Herbert. His his floor is even on the rise. But man, you're not going to, the only thing I question is your need for Devonta Smith if DK's not 100%, if Brian Thomas Jr. has already had the chest issue and he was and Trevor's issue. Does that leave you too thin at wide receiver?
And it might, but if that week comes, you just find a receiver off the waiver and you play him, man, because I'm doing this 100%. You can upgrade from Kyler to Josh Allen, and then you add, you will have easily the most dominant running back room. So I say that you should do this for sure if you have enough spots to where you can play Henry, Breece, Kyron, and Jacobs every week. Like, if you have to start 2 running backs and you have 2 flex spots, then that means that if you do trade Devonta Smith, then you still have, like, you probably only need to start 2 receivers, and then you're just choosing between London and Metcalf because your flex spots are going to be made up of running backs anyway. So you don't really need the receiver depth at that point.
He took the words out of my mouth. Is that ideally, if he made the trade, then he would turn and flip probably Jacobs for wide receivers if injuries get worse, or maybe I would do it even if not, and maybe just immediately upgrade. I don't have an example. It's hard to look at teams, but the trade deadline's got to be pretty close in most leagues. So
most leagues are around like the week 11, week 12, something like that.
Yeah, I would probably do that.
If they have them. Some leagues don't have trade deadlines, but I'll say this much. I made the case a few weeks ago to get ready to trade DeAndre Swift. In my opinion, I think he's about to hit a plateau. He's got a good matchup against New England this week. But then after New England, he's got Green Bay, which is their bottom 12 against running backs. He's got Minnesota, Detroit. They're both bottom 5, I guess bottom 5, top 5, however you want to look at it. They're both in the top 5 toughest matchups against running backs. And then after a game against San Francisco, they have, again, back-to-back games against Minnesota and Detroit. So once they get past New England, 5 of their next 6 matchups are against teams that are among the top 12 toughest for fantasy running backs. And so I don't think DeAndre Swift is at the point where he's just going to smash and overcome all those tough matchups. Like I think that there are tough days ahead for Swift, and he has had the nuts run out of fantasy matchups for the last 5 weeks now. His buys in there too, so I guess technically the last 6 week, but his last 6 games have, including the one this week coming up against New England, have all been against teams that have been 20th or worst against running backs. Like that, it's just been incredible matchups, and he's right, and
he still doesn't do it. He has. I mean,
you still have to go out there and perform. So no knock against DeAndre Swift, but it's just wild for the schedule to work out that you have that kind of run of great matchups and then this run of just extremely difficult matchups following that. So even if you don't make the specific trade, I think it's good to go try to do like Swift plus something else and upgrade at elsewhere in your lineup. But
yeah, he says that he might be able to get Puka for Jacobs, which I would be in favor of that. There's another Puka question related to Puka. 2 Puka questions in one back-to-back segment. John Flores wants to know, hey guys, I was wondering, should he trade Drake London for Puka and Josh Downs? So, number one, I'll ask you this question. Are you typically the person who likes trading, getting the better, one player for 2 players in that scenario, as most people are? They would rather have the most dominant player and give up 2 ancillary pieces. The second part of that question, though, is that the way you would feel about this? Because I don't know if it is that Drake London, is he that much more superior than Puka? And if that's the case, then you're getting Josh Downs as a throw-in. So I think I know your answer is, yeah, you're doing that trade, correct?
You're right on. I am typically on the end of, if I'm doing a 2-for-1, I want to be the guy getting the 1.
Yeah,
but in this case, I feel Drake London and Puka, like rest of season, I see them as almost even assets. So if you're telling me that I can get guys that I view on the same playing field, and I'm getting Josh Downs thrown in for free, who like I don't view him on the Puka level or anything like that, but like just to give you some names, like I think rest of season Josh Downs is probably in like the Hopkins, Khalil Shakir, JSN territory. So if you're getting somebody in that area along with Puka for a guy that I feel on the same level as London, I would do that deal. Especially if you have to factor in, do you have somebody you're comfortable dropping on your bench, because you're getting the 2 players here, so you're gonna have to drop somebody to make the move. I'm sure you have somebody on the end of your bench you can drop, but just give that a thought as well. But yeah, I would do this deal.
Batista wants to know DeAndre Swift or Amari Cooper, and unless he's clearly that's not Amari DiMercado. I'm kidding.
It might be.
I can't stand seeing that name. That made me so mad last week, realizing that. But
so no Keon Coleman, right?
No Keon Coleman.
We got that. But Swift has a great matchup this week, though.
What is Cooper's status as far as practice? That was a late injury last week that popped up that kept him out of the game. I don't envision that being.
Let's see if Sleeper has any updates on Amari, because I haven't checked anything on him today.
Fair enough. Practice reports are that he was limited today with the wrist. Coleman did not practice, so limited to start Wednesday is always a good sign.
Khalil Shakir is going to play, so we know he's going to have that target competition too. But Indy's also a good matchup for receivers, so you've got 2 good matchups for both of these guys. I think I would go with Swift. I'd ride Swift out another week
for now. Yeah, exactly.
And I appreciate that, man.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll jump in real quick. I got a couple other names. I know that we're only supposed to do 2, but it sure felt like there were 2 running backs that deserve to get a little bit of props this week. That one was just outside of it. And then, of course, just like Josh Downs moves in, and that's Tyrone Tracy against Carolina. The matchup is just sickening. Obviously, we saw what Kamara last week, 200 plus yards, and every other running back prior, has just absolutely feasted on Carolina. The workload has completely went in Tyrone Tracy's favor now. It was obviously, we've seen the progression all year. It's been Devin Singletary. Then it was more of a Devin Singletary 70-30. Then it started getting 50-50. Then the injury, and we thought, all right, well, Devin Singletary is going to come back and then reclaim at least 45% role. It has not been. We're talking now 4 to 5% type role, which is just probably hyperbole, but it's not too far removed. As the RB, 15, he's someone that again will be on your bench. That in some leagues somebody's going to have him, and they're going to have to make a decision between him and forgive me for not having just a ton of names in typical perfect fashion. I didn't charge my mouse, and so I get a fly by the seat of my pants without having to use a mouse, which I don't need a mouse. How hard can it be? What do? I just scroll with my finger or something like that. The other one is I don't want to be scared off of Chase Brown against Baltimore. I know the matchup is not ideal, but we've seen Chase Brown take full advantage of really difficult situations, and he's continued to just exploit those. He's averaged almost 17 fantasy points a game since week 4, and I don't worry about Khalil Herbert, doing anything necessary, and so it just really feels like this is one of those be scared. Like I can see people putting this as an avoid matchup, and I don't think that's going to be the case this week. Chase Brown he's proven that in both aspects of the game. Great pass catcher, really good running back on the outside between the tackles. Did you see that? He pretty much not saved himself, but receiving touchdown after being a little bit bottled up to start off. He's very dynamic, and me being in the line, of course I'm rooting for him a little bit more, but I say don't be scared against the Ravens this week. Trust Chase Brown going forward. Maybe a little hesitation, on your end because Khalil Herbert involvement. I get that. If we're not going to do, the people that we want to play and the people that are scared to play Chase Brown, who are some people that we really should be worried about heading into week 10? And this, by the way, for people that aren't aware, remember, these are guys that are outside like the top 35 on Fantasy Pros ECR.
Inside.
Pardon me. Inside. Yes. Inside the top 35.
These are the top guys.
These are the top guys. These guys that you typically would have in your lineup that we're telling you, hey, maybe you should pass on this guy and play one of the names we listed above. Who's one of those guys is going to fall into that category for you?
Yeah, and it's funny you say that because Tyrone Tracy and Chase Brown both come ahead of this guy in my running back rankings for this week, and it feels gross. I got to be honest. It does not feel good to try to fade anybody in the Detroit Lions offense right now with the way that it's humming. But I'm at least a little bit worried about David Montgomery this week. Now, I'd be less worried if I knew for sure that last week was a sign of things to come. But prior to last week, Montgomery hadn't played more than 50% of the snaps and hadn't seen more than 12 carries since week 3. The involvement was just really weird. But the wild thing is he was still a top 20 running back 3 out of those 4 weeks that he didn't play over 50% of the snaps. But you were just living off of 4 touchdowns across those 4 games. And so not only has the role been somewhat questionable the last month or so, but the matchup this week is pretty tough too. Over the last 6 weeks, the Texans have had the 5th toughest. They've been the 5th toughest matchup for fantasy running backs. And there's only been 3 teams on the year that have given up fewer rushing touchdowns after the season as well. So you're talking about the thing you've been depending on for David Montgomery. The Texans have been very stingy with giving out on the year. So it could obviously look really silly if the trend of Montgomery getting 17 carries last week continues, or if he, finds himself in the end zone a couple times like he so often does. But given the up and down role, given the matchup that he has to deal with this week, I think the running back 20 ranking on the Fantasy Pros ECR, I think that's a pass for me. He is still a borderline running back 2, and I don't think you can really afford to set him in most leagues, but maybe you picked up a Tyrone Tracy early in the year or a Chase Brown early in the year. You might have, if you only have to start 2 running backs, there is a world where you could have 2 running backs that are better options to David Montgomery this week. So I would just encourage you to take a hard look at your lineup, see if you can possibly afford to pull him out. And if nothing else, DFS lineups, things like that, I might just stay away from Montgomery this week.
Well, clearly the easy answer is anybody that's ever facing the Houston Texans, you sit, because when the Texans
I'm really just here to pander to Colby. That's all I'm doing.
That's all we ever do. It's going to be 95 or 96 to 2. They're going to graciously give Detroit the 2-point safety at the end of the game. And I don't know how Detroit's going to score any more than that, but that's just, and that's me hedging
It's going to be
my
such
bet.
a fun game, though.
Oh, it really will be. I really want Nico to come back soon. I really miss him as part of the offense there. But speaking of coming back, this is a specific running back that's going to be back in your lineup, and many will say the single best free agent waiver pickup of the week was not actually a free agent waiver pickup, but more or less a reinstation from your IR, and that's Christian McCaffrey. And yes, pitchforks galore. I know, Nate, how dumb. I've been waiting 9 weeks. I'm starting Christian McCaffrey without concern, and I get it. It's really hard to get a new. I'm gonna use Nintendo. I'm gonna go old school. It's hard to get a Nintendo with given the opportunity to open it 2 days before Christmas and play and not do it and say I want to wait for Christmas. But Christmas with CMC is going to be week, after week 10 when he's 100% back, in my opinion. I know, he should reprise the role immediately. I don't think he does this week. Tampa Bay, which while they have been gouged a little bit by more powerful running backs over the past couple weeks, Jordan Mason's cleared to participate. I do think it's a more 50-50 workload. I think they're cautious with him. He's the RB12. That it doesn't shock me he's that high, but I really think it's going to be hard for people, like you said, with Montgomery, not to start him. But again, if you happen to have that Tyrone Tracy or Chase Brown, I think Tracy would be an easier play for sure. Chase Brown would still give people reservations because they're going, oh man, against Baltimore's run D, or CMC maybe splitting carries with Jordan Mason against Tampa, but Tampa's looked susceptible. I still just I don't have CMC anywhere, so it's really easy for me to say I'm passing on him because I don't have to make that option.
Yeah, I get it, man. I've only got him in one spot, and if he's healthy, I'm gonna throw him in there. In my rankings this week, I've got him as a top 12 running back. But I get where you're coming from, being a little weary of at least his first game back. But man, I'll at least say this: even if this week he is somewhat limited, and it's not until week 11 that we see like full CMC, but if we see it from week 11 on, there's not a bad matchup on his fantasy schedule until you get to the fantasy championship and he has to play Detroit. But so week 17, he's got a really tough matchup against Detroit's run defense. But outside of that, it is smooth selling the rest of the way for CMC. So if you somehow survive the CMC injury and you're still contending, or you traded for CMC and you're a contender, congratulations, man, because he's coming back just in time to bring home a fantasy championship.
And there are, timing is everything. And unfortunately, the timing for my second pass play couldn't have come at a worse time. And that is one George Pickens, who again, this is another one that I hate even saying I'm potentially fading because I've been such a big George Pickens fan. And I've just absolutely loved everything about the connection that he's had, with Russ. And unfortunately, though, it's when I say the timing, what's the timing? Oh, the Commanders go and get Marshawn Lattimore, who in this scenario, it's going to be just one of those difficult matchups that I hate. And I'm probably going to start Pickens in most scenarios because I can't see myself actually sitting him. But if you're in one of those, 2 wide receiver leagues and you have just the firepower to do it, I always worry about that. And the question that I have also, and maybe someone can answer it and tell me I'm crazy or stupid, but I don't see Lattimore not being able to come in and actually play, because they play a really, that man coverage role well. And I think that that's what they'll do is just say, you get Pickens and follow him around.
I agree.
And I don't think he has, it's the system could be advanced. The system could be difficult. I'm far from a defensive backs coach to know the acclimation period, but still, it's when you're picking these guys, we're also limited to wide receivers within the top 35. So someone's going to be a tough name to mention. And I have one. You have another wide receiver who I agree with you wholeheartedly as far as this matchup goes.
Yeah, and I'll say this, even before adding Marshawn Lattimore, I talked about earlier, like looking at more recent samples. I mean, it obviously doesn't hurt that, Carolina and the Giants are a part of this
Sure.
sample, but over the last 6 weeks, the Commanders, they were one of the defenses that we were targeting for receivers at the start
Mhm.
of the year. But over the last 6 weeks, they've been the third toughest matchup for fantasy receivers. So they've clearly turned some things around there, and that adding Marshawn Lattimore certainly won't help. And I agree with you. I do think that they just say, hey, just go cover Pickens and make his assignment easy this week. And it's not a good thing for Pickens by any means. So yeah, I agree. I'm lower on Pickens this week as well. But yeah, another receiver. This is honestly mostly just a matchup thing because Cortland Sutton has been pretty solid lately outside of the goose egg that he put up a couple weeks ago.
Mhm.
He's been a top 24 receiver throughout of his last 4 games. He was the wide receiver 6 last week. On top of that, he's seen 10 plus targets in back-to-back weeks as well. But man, and I'm not telling you anything you don't know, Nate, but this Chiefs defense is just so damn tough, man. I mean, they are unreal. They've been the fourth toughest matchup for fantasy receivers over the last 6 weeks. And I don't know if this is like a hot take or anything, but I'm still not personally sold on Bo Nix as a quarterback either. And so whenever you have the tough matchup, however you feel about Bo Nix, and the last couple weeks, you're probably ready to just plug Sutton into your lineups, and with the injuries on that we're dealing with, and then the teams that are on bye, you might not feel like you can afford to bench Cortland Sutton. But I would just encourage you, kind of like what I said with David Montgomery, just take a second look at your lineup, see if there are some players with some better matchups and things like that, because I think that this could be a tough week for Cortland Sutton, where you're just hoping and praying that that he finds the end zone. So if I can help it, I'm going to pass on Sutton this week.
Yeah, it is one of the definite, spots of concern that I had within this pocket of wide receivers too, just because they've been historically good, shutting down about every aspect and not looking back. So the
Yep.
wrap up the smash and passes at smash. We're saying smash Josh Downs against the Buffalo Bills, smash Brian Robinson against the Pittsburgh Steelers, Tyrone Tracy against Carolina, Chase Brown at Baltimore, Mark Andrews against the Bengals. And I'm cautiously telling you to be careful with CMC in his return week. Drew's telling you be careful with David Montgomery against Houston. George Pickens and Cortland Sutton both have difficult matchups, and there's someone to temper expectations with. And if we can just sprinkle in a couple names here at the very end of people that if you're as we enter, because of course, if you're listening, you're vying for the playoffs. We know you're there. Some of these names of, some stashes or guys that are owned in less than, say, 50% of sleeper leagues. I know one that stands out to me is Audric Estime. He's already got the vote of confidence in Denver. Javonte has been anything short of what is that? He has not been whelming. He's been very underwhelming, if that is the proper use of any word whelming, which I've never heard of. But he's very less than whelming. And Audric Estime, with Sean Payton giving him his, pat on the back, I think that there's a case to be made that he might be someone down the road that could at least provide some value. Is there any other handcuff running backs that you would say, hey, are you wanting to handcuff your own running backs or another team's running backs? What's more important at this point in the season?
The answer, I guess, really is both. And that's what I put from my stash this week was basically just handcuff running backs. And whenever the draft is going on, I'm typically not somebody that's going to draft my own handcuff. I'll take a shot at a few other other players' handcuffs just to see if I get lucky if somebody was to get injured or things like that. And obviously, we're not hoping or rooting for injuries or anything like that. But I just this is the time of the year where I'm starting to drop my fifth or sixth receiver on my bench, and I'm just going to start picking up handcuff running backs just in case. And something else too that I try to do, and some of you guys might know this, some of you maybe you don't. I mean, I don't like to assume how much experience the people listening to this have whenever it comes to fantasy football and strategy and things like that. So some of these things, while they might sound simple to others, could be things that other folks have never heard of or haven't thought of doing. But if Sunday morning comes around and you have a player that's ruled out to injury and your league has IR spots and you have an open IR spot, Even if it's just a 1 week thing and you know that, throw that person on the IR anyway and go out there and try to stash a running back. And if you just so happen to get lucky and the player, again, not that we're rooting for injury, but if a starting running back gets hurt and you just happen to pick up the backup, you just beat a waiver wire push and you're going to incredibly help yourself at that point. And look, a lot of folks, like myself in some leagues, you might not have that much fab left at this point in the year. And so if you're left to try to bid against the rest of your league mates, you could be shit out of luck. So just try to improve your chances of getting ahead of the waiver. Like Blake Corum, he's only drafted in like 25% of, or he's only rostered like 25% of leagues, something like that. And I get it. I mean, he's getting no touches, but him getting no touches is like, as weird as it sounds, is almost even more reason to pick him up, because you see the role that Sean McVay is giving to Kyron Williams, giving him all of the work. And if he was to go down, I fully believe that Blake Corum would step into that role. Ray Davis is probably going to be a popular pickup because of what he did last week, but he's still out there in a decent amount of leagues as well. Braylon Allen, he's under 50% owned. He's another guy that should be rostered in 100% of leagues. In my opinion, the handcuffs to the guys that are getting strong workloads, and then the handcuffs that you could kind of project that would get the work. Like, I'll give a counter example to that. If I'm the J.K. Dobbins owner and he goes down, I don't think it's one running back. Like, I don't think they're going to hand all of the work to Kamani Vidal at that point. It'll probably get split up at that point. Like, not every single backfield is created equally to where, all right, starter goes down, backup gets all the touches at that point. But I do think that there are some backfields, like if Breece Hall did go down, I do think Braylon Allen would get a ton of the work. If James Cook did go down, I do think that Ray Davis would get the majority of the work. Same thing with Blake Corum and Kyron Williams. There's running backs out there that are that way. And even Khalil Herbert, like he's probably on the front of everybody's minds right now because he just got traded. But I'm in a couple leagues that don't have extremely deep benches, and he didn't even get claimed this morning. And so I'm probably going to go in and pick him up. He's another guy. We don't know how that Cincinnati backfield is going to shake out now that they brought him over. We assume that Chase Brown's going to still be the guy, but what if we're wrong? Yeah. Like, it's not like it would be the first time, So this is the time of the year where I'm ditching my wide receiver depth, and I'm just trying to add running backs and hope that I hit a lottery ticket. So that would be my advice to you. Go check out your roster, see if you have spots on the end of your bench where you can do something like that, and just stash a couple guys before Sunday.
Yep. And if you're looking for lottery tickets of information, obviously, like we said, head over to fantasyandframes.com. All the articles are there for your perusal, the rankings, etc. Each one of them contains nuggets of value that can help deliver a fantasy lottery ticket going forward. There's Shoot the Gap next with Jorge and JT, and then we'll be back I'll be back Sunday morning for the Sunday pregame kickoff show. If you jump in, of course, come say hello, ask some questions. We had a ton of good starting sits at the time. So for Drew Scott, I'm Nate Markham. We'll see you next week. Cheers.
This should be played at high volume, preferably in a residential area.